Tonight's tonight's two chapters, they cover what we could call ontology and epistemology, which is what there is and how we know what there is. How do we understand the reality? How do we understand what we're doing, where we are? And how do we know that? How can we validly assess that? And the first has to do with, you could say, vision. And the second has to do with establishing that vision not on the basis of belief, but on the basis of what we can call valid cognition, or epistemology, or in Buddhism we call it pramana. So, so these two chapters are very important. Now, I might go a little bit over time, 10, maybe 20 minutes, so kindly forgive me for doing that. There's just a lot of material. And I think some of you are familiar with some of the teachings that actually tell us that when we're studying the Dharma, we might sometimes have to undergo a little bit of hardship in terms of hanging in there with the studies. It's a very auspicious day today. It's a full moon, so it's all very good what we're doing here. All right. So the first, here you have a couple of pictures of Thinley Norbu Rinpoche with his father, Kyabje Dudjom Rinpoche, and the other with Kyabje Dilku Khyentse Rinpoche, as well as Rinpoche's own son, Tsongsa Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche. So here we have some family pics. Chapter 2, Source of Phenomena. So material reality is compounded. Immaterial unreality is compounded. Actual nirvana is uncompounded. With that, we mean that enlightenment is not a construct like the material and the immaterial. Nagarjuna means that any conceptual imputation we might attribute the material and the immaterial is equally a construction. So if we say, is there a chair? Then that's obviously a material reality. If we say there's no chair, then we mean there's nothing there, but that's actually still that there's nothing there. That nothing that's still compounded. This is slightly an aside, but what is it again? I think it's in Alice in Wonderland. I think there's the king or something asks, the old king asks Alice, what is it? Look into the horizon there. Your eyes are so much better. What is there down the road? And I think Alice says, but sire, yes sire, there is nothing. And the king goes, wonderful Alice, to be so young and to be able to see so well, to be able to see there's nothing, something like that, or to be able to see nothing, sorry. it's a lot sharper than that. But anyway, we understand the immaterial very much as something we would call an imputation on the basis of the immaterial, or what can be objectified and so forth. Whereas Nirvana, enlightenment, this is not something that is such a phenomenon. It doesn't fall into neither compounded or uncompounded. So what actually has been implied here is that we're not talking about some finite absolute. So as such, we are avoiding both being religious or being philosophers, but we are talking about an actual discerning awareness, and that has nothing to do with what can be objectified as either compounded or uncompounded. So The Buddha asserted that all phenomena are created by consciousness. This consciousness is empty, as we just established, yet imbued with enlightened qualities. When this nature is not known, it is samsara. When it is known, it is nirvana, enlightenment. So you could say the elephant in the room with Buddhists in the modern world is this view on reality. And conventionally, Buddhists are predictably subscribers to an ethical practice that's common to both religious as well as conventional society. So there everybody agrees we're all fine, religious, conventional, moral people and so forth. But when it comes to its science, when it comes to its analysis, then the Buddhists, they see things very different from the two existing camps of, you would say, the Western belief systems, the theists and the non-theists, what we here call eternalists and nihilists. See, they see neither an almighty God nor external objects that what creates our reality. See, Mahayana Buddhists, they would assert, or all Buddhists would assert, it's our consciousness that creates our universe. Now, we here need to say that this continuous consciousness is also seen to be without any absolute substance. Enlightenment is seeing through this imputed substantiality of both matter and mind. And so awakening to the subtle and pure phenomena of abiding wisdom, that is dismantling, you could say, any kind of something that we could objectify. So it's empty. And yet, it possesses the qualities of enlightenment. This consciousness in its nature is not tangible, doesn't exist in terms of time and space, yet we know it possesses these qualities of enlightenment when we could say, not caught up in narrowness, and very often spontaneously qualities arise even in us. And also we can see these qualities manifest in others, and we can appreciate them, something that reflects that we have these ourselves. But this nature that we can, you could say, identify within our subjectivity that we last time discussed in terms of, what is it again, continuous consciousness on the deluded side, or in its awake state, it's what we call Dharmakaya. When this nature is not known, that's when we have samsara. And when it is known, it's nirvana, enlightenment. Now notice this thing that we're talking about, this nature around, this science around consciousness. It is a science. And it's very important, this chapter that we're studying here, because this is the science that we are approaching in Buddhism. It's not something that we have learned in our schools. In our schools, in general, in the modern world, there's no such talk about wisdom or anything like that. Qualities within consciousness and so forth. Yes, everybody intuitively appreciates it, but a place where it's been mapped down and where there is an applied science around this, that is then the study of the Dharma. And so this chapter here, and what we're doing, is very important. So, as far as our experience goes, deluded, our ordinary phenomena, they are experienced in terms of they are born, they remain, and they cease. Non-deluded, you say correspondingly the Buddhas have unborn Dharmakaya, unceasing Sambhogakaya, and non-remaining Nirmanakaya. As far as the Buddhas go, they appear to others, but they themselves are not bound by birth, remaining, and cessation. So we do talk about, you could say, Buddhas. We do talk about the qualities of enlightenment, but these are not something that exists in terms of production and existence and dissolution. Now these terms, Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya, they're described differently in different contexts. So they're a little bit, you could say, sometimes it can be a bit confusing. Presently here we're just talking about the nature of phenomena, both subjective and objective phenomena. They can be understood in these terms. I would say have some patience around this if it's not clear right away. In a very simple way, And this first time actually personally that I had some little kind of dawn of understanding this was actually with Thinley Norbu, who explained the Dharmakaya as empty and the Sambhogakaya as the character that arises within that emptiness. You would say the quality of consciousness when it's not confused. And with that Sambhogakaya or quality or enjoyment body, we talk about all the infinite qualities that are associated with enlightenment. And then the non-remaining Niyamanakaya is the way that this nature manifests endlessly, ceaselessly, but of course specifically we sometimes refer to Niyamanakaya in terms of teachers. And so we do talk about the teacher that arises and manifests, but that's how it appears to us. If we look in the Diamond Sutra, for example, the Buddha there says, if you see me in terms of having come here and taught, you will never understand what the Buddha is. So in the Prajnaparamita, there's a lot of, you could say, antidotes to these constructions that we habitually operate with. Our perceptions of phenomena depend on our subjective consciousness. We know the difference between confused and unconfused perception. Having Buddha nature we can do something about it. I think that's what is meant. And if we don't do anything, then we miss the point, meaning that we have the potential and we have an opportunity. But if we don't use this opportunity, this would be a waste. Now, as far as our perceptions of phenomena go, they appear due to our subjective condition, how we are, our moods and our attitudes and so forth. So we can see how things appear differently, also depending who we are and at what times. So all these ensuing attitudes, emotions, etc., they arise. But these perceptions that we have, we know then from our own experience that they don't have any, you could say, absolute solid existence. And we also know from quantum physics that our perceptions, so-called apparently objective perceptions, are linked up with the observer, the subject. Thinley Norbu is emphasizing the value of recognizing our potential for seeing clearly. We know ourselves when we are deluded, when we're not. And we know then, we can establish that we have innate Buddha nature, that with the undoing of confusion and realizing this innate disposition that we have, then we also have corresponding purer perception. We know that from just sitting down and coming to, relaxing, possibly meditating and so forth, then our perceptions clear up. We see things with a more fresh mind. But not doing that, we will wander in samsara and mistakenly then asserting some innate value to self and also to the perceived other, we then sustain this nihilist habit. And that's where we miss the point. So in remaining then stuck in this nihilist habit, we gullibly believe in our immediate habitual perceptions. Wasting this precious opportunity of the human existence, we circle in continuous suffering. So as long as we're caught by the habit of nihilism, which is innate, you could say we do it all the time. But the thing is, if we look, if we're not ignoring, then we can actually free ourselves from that. And we can see that we could choose to be caught by this, or we could choose not to. But if we are caught by it, yes, then we fixate on the aspects of our world, our body, that of others, and as being something, phenomena that really objectively are there. Or we could say that really are not there. We see things in terms of what was described before, which is then the, we see things in terms of something that arises, something that's there for some time and then that disappears. So unless we free ourselves from this substantialist habit, then we'll be stuck in this delusion of samsara. And as a consequence, then sometimes happy, sometimes suffering. Now, material science then looks for meaning in the objects exclusively. They ignore the role of the subject and its relationship to the object. Objects are seen as separate from mind. This is like looking for where the projection came from, while we're ignoring the projector. So the result of sustaining this materialist or non-spiritual view is simply being confused about the relationship between subject and object. In general, science holds that reality is constructed through the relationship and the constructions of external objects. Matter is here seen apart from mind, as if it existed independent of the subject. And Thinley Norbu compares this to imagining a projection with no projector. So as long as there is dualistic mind, then this continuous ordinary mind that we talked about last time perpetuates samsaric possibilities. This is what we call sipa, or that what we call samsara basically means it can change into anything. Also, this word possibility is something that's used a lot in quantum science. So this is this dualistic mind is the foundation of all similar materialist sciences throughout the ages. Materialist nihilism places all its trust on deluded and dualistic phenomena. So this is science, you could say, that is quite universal, just understanding phenomena without really questioning their nature. And there's nothing wrong then with analyzing the way phenomena functions. The trouble lies when we then attribute some inherent existence that's divorced from our subjective perception. This approach that we then pursue there comes across with tremendous authority. And that's where you could say there's something that needs to be said and something that needs to be refuted. And the difference that we see in such science down through the ages is really just changing according to particular times and cultures. And as Rinpoche says, the inclinations and karma of the various sentient beings. So non-spiritual materialism, it rejects spiritual ideas, and they're seen as being imaginary, and that's where it gets dogmatic. So this comes from the habit of attributing ultimate value to material substance. So Buddhism refutes this view that because substance is something that's compounded, it's impermanent, and its objective value is recognized to be entirely contingent on the subject. And once we have that kind of dualistic fixation, this leads us to overlooking innate qualities of non-dual reality, including Buddha nature. And that is then something that remains as what we call a cognitive obscuration, and this prevents us to seeing through the delusion and awakening. So we have to acknowledge that this non-spiritual science and Buddhism, they are basically different. So it doesn't mean that on a relative level we can accept materialist science, but in terms of absolute, yes, they're very different. So as much as we can dismantle then the flawed logic of the materialist science, doesn't mean we should judge persons or you could say this is evil. It's just, you could say, on the basis of particular cultures, particular habits, and particular ideas that such ideas they you could say grip people. So there's nothing bad, good or bad. It's just a different way of seeing things. But that this kind of flawed logic is deceptive, we can see in the inability to remedy suffering. Basically, as long as we have dualism, then we have samsara. Recognizing and actualizing Buddha nature, then delusions are eliminated. So according to Buddhist science, we would say mind is continually related to its objects and does so as long as there is dualistic habit. This is the source of dualistic phenomena, samsaric existence, and until Buddha nature is recognized, this is what in effect creates these delusional projections. This again is brought to exhaustion through wisdom and seeing through the apparent solidity of these outer and inner conceptions. The phenomena of ordinary dualistic concepts cannot be trusted any more than a mirage dam. So from the Mahayana perspective, what we all ordinarily perceive is delusion. It's not real. It's created by a delusional mind that suffers from objectifying the other as separate from the self, and also perceiving then the delusional mind as solid. We have both what we call self of person and self of phenomena. This is the basis of what we then have. That's dualistic fixation. Yet, this ordinary reality is what is the object of the general, what we loosely here call scientific knowledge. And it's trusted. But Thinley Norbu just here he then says it can't be trusted more than the dam that we have in a mirage or in a dream. So when we scrutinize ordinary phenomena, we see they are a web of interdependent conditions. No independent object can be found. Objective perception is dependent on the perceiving subject. Okay, so everything that we perceive are these conditions that work together. So we have a rice seed, it becomes a rice sprout, it becomes a rice plant. So these are just conditions that work together, they're interdependent, but there's never anything that is independent. The sprout is dependent on the seed, and eventually the sprout ceases when it becomes a plant. And so that we have such an idea as something being objective, that's entirely something that's dependent on us, the observer. So fascinating as the hunt for new discoveries might be, it's endless. And sublime beings, no appearances are deceptive and cannot be caught. So the delusion that we generally have in our culture of analysis and science lies in believing in objective reality. And this, of course, we can pursue endlessly. There's new discoveries after new discoveries, and each becomes an object of fascination. And we continually have this sense of, now we have discovered the truth, and then yet we wait for another discovery. However, sages, they're not fooled and are not caught by this belief that they're going to find ultimate reality in some objective phenomena. They know that phenomena appear without having anything about them that can be caught or held. They know appearances are deceptive and empty of the value that ordinary confused beings attribute to them. So sublime beings teach their students the illusory nature of phenomena and how to cultivate wisdom that discerns this reality. They also teach how to integrate phenomena as skillful means for this realization. So sublime beings do not display whatever power they might have to show off, but rather their main objective, out of compassion, is to enable their students to realize intangible wisdom. In all of Buddhism, we see how the path teaches how to use tangible phenomena as skillful means. For example, our body. We place it in the 7 points of Vajrayana and we meditate. There we're using tangible phenomena. And we also then, through that, establish shamatha and particularly vipassana, which enables the accumulation of wisdom. So the intention of sublime beings is to alleviate suffering. And suffering, it doesn't mean then that we aren't recognized in the world or that we're not materially successful. Suffering comes from belief in this solid objective reality, because that causes further suffering. And so the skillfulness of the path that then combines both the tangible and the intangible is like wood, two pieces of wood that enables to light the fire of wisdom, and then this fire of wisdom burns away the dense thicket of confusion. Now, Tantric Buddhism in particular is very skillful in its means, and it leads to mastery over relative phenomena, what we call common siddhi, and achievement of enlightenment, ultimate siddhi. Tantric Buddhism operates very much with using our perceptions, and this leads us to gain, you could say, mastery over relative phenomena, but ultimately also it's intended to bring about the clearing away of the dualistic confusion. And so the ultimate siddhi, ultimate objective is then enlightenment. So our subject-object interaction creates intention, which produces habits and energy. Now, intention here should just be understood in terms of what happens when we, as persons, interact with our objects. This confused consciousness then projects our realm of experience, this universe. The habits of such a consciousness can be discontinued. We needn't perpetuate it. When we see mind as the source, we can create positive conditions through intention. So we can use this objectifying mind. So we operate with this viewing mind, and we recognize it's the source of phenomena. This has been established. And we can then see that the mind then has particular attitudes, intentions that are the basis of our further experience. So this subject, our first person subjectivity, says me, my experience, and that then is what perceives any given object and creates its solidity. You could say object itself has no mind of its own. Tables don't think I'm a table. So objects don't have any, say, sense of identity. And our perceptions, hence, are relative. And we know from our life experience that we all see things differently. Like the example last time with two persons looking at the same number. One person will see it's a 6. The other will insist, no, it's a number 9. So this consciousness then that we subscribe to is what continues to sustain this dualistic perception. And this is not merely something that's created through our physical aggregation. It's something that continues after we pass away. And so it's something that continues lifetime after lifetime. But if we become aware of how it is that we project this deluded reality, then we can, you could say, untangle ourselves from these projections. And if we cease to externalize, objectify these perceptions as separate from our consciousness, then we can begin to operate and work with these conditions through changing our intention. And so this comes from ceasing to establish this duality of self and other. So we say that without without wisdom, the so-called achievements that we have in science, in philosophy, and in the arts, and even spiritual reflections and thoughts, they are unreliable products with no long-lasting benefit. So that's if we don't have wisdom. So in that case, they're really just based on fragmented, as Rinpoche calls it, fragmented energy of habit, and they have no long-lasting benefit. Phenomena are perishing from the moment they appear. In duality, there are only momentary instances, and the knowledge of materialism only applies to such shifting realities. So anything substantial is subject to these various perceptions, as we've established. And we, as they change, they are something that never actually truly exists. They're continually shifting. So we could say that from the moment that they appear, they are already changing. So of course they appear. There is someone here, there's something here, but they are dissolving. And because there's something that is dissolving, we can also see there's no essence to them. And so that's where we should understand that the understanding of materialism is very much based on just a narrow scope of these shifting phenomena. Objects have nothing about them that can be grasped as ultimate. So of course there's a lot of celebration around these endless discoveries that we come up with, the latest this or that, but they are fleeting display of flirtatious mind. These findings, they are just phenomena that are there for a while and then they're forgotten. This is the nature of delusion. And this is not particularly mystical. This is something that is well known to us. We assume that there is a science that's getting more and more knowledgeable, but for example, Thomas Kuhn in the 1960s, an American academic, wrote a work called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions that highlighted, in fact, that our science is not really particularly going anywhere. And we're not denying of the value of many scientific findings, but we are talking about penetrating to the heart of reality. And from that point of view, science has nothing really to offer us. Okay, again, remember what Rinpoche said. We're not saying that this is bad or good, or people are good or bad. It's really just understanding the validity of these science and what role it has in terms of understanding reality, and particularly then what is that drives suffering and what it is that drives enlightenment. Any questions? Mm-hmm. Yeah. No questions? Okay, well, we will stop again a bit later on and you can see if there's any questions then. I would say don't be overwhelmed by any of this. We're just making a solid case for the value of this quality of wisdom. That is not, you could say, something that we've been exposed to in terms of our general science. But we're not, you could say, slamming science as such. We're just saying that it can do certain things, but certain things it's not cannot do. Now, the search for some tangible, conceptual explanations bring only partial, negligible knowledge. Rinpoche says, whether mind creates conceptions of an inner subject or an outer object, it is deluded. And Rinpoche also comes with this quote, when the magic city of delusion disappears into empty desert, the eyes again find an illusory jewel. And I take this to mean that this is not all, you could say, bleak in the sense that nothing is left, but it's once the delusion disappears, then we then have the illusory jewel of awakening that becomes manifest. So comparing science and Buddhism is problematic. We sometimes have some people who would say, oh, emptiness, that's something that can be understood in terms of science. But emptiness is not an objective void. It is permeated by cognizance. So we sometimes give the analogy of the sky. But there also immediately said that quality of its being uncompounded like the sky, that works in terms of that analogy, but the analogy is not valid in terms of of it being inanimate. And when we talk about the emptiness, we are talking about emptiness that's endowed with a heart of cognizance or a heart of clarity. So science can only objectify emptiness, and it ignores them. Science, and even also you could say a lot of what we have in philosophy, the ideas of deconstruction and so on, these critiques of logocentrism or foundationalism and so forth, very often comes up with just a naught, and it doesn't come up with the wisdom that is liberated. And that is ultimately what is the aim of, you could say, the Buddhist intention. The source of objective phenomena is ego, and while ego is without essence, it's only through examination that we see through that hoax. If we see that we are the source, we can understand how pure inner and external pure phenomena can eventuate. Inner pure phenomena manifests outer pure phenomena through practice. So you could say, just like we established outer objective phenomena as empty, this subjectivity also has nothing substantial about it. And if through practice we can realize that we are the ones that create this display of phenomena, and that in reality we are not subjected to any external or internal reality, then inner awake phenomena begins to appear. And this dissolves this notion of outer and inner perceptions as solid. And with that experience of non-duality, then we begin to liberate natural capacity for a different kind of perception, which is then when we, like Rinpoche says, abide in the awareness of immeasurable, indivisible, non-grasping phenomena. And that's where we then arrive at what is known as pure perception or sacred outlook. Unless we have that, then spiritual practice with grasping doesn't really lead beyond the usual frenzy, the usual grasping at phenomena and all the happiness and unhappiness that comes with it. We have some Buddhist schools that are what we call substantialist. They believe that there is some subtle objective phenomena, but this can be a skillful means, and it leads to some sense of peace. So accepting that there still is some objective reality, such practitioners would then still achieve some subjective peace, what we call cessation. The Mahayana, yes, it establishes what we call shunyata or even mahashunyata, complete lack of anything that can be objectified and anything that's substantial. But doing so, it still recognizes the temporary value of the lower vehicles, or the Vibhashika path, or the Shravakayana, and so forth. But the actual aim of the Mahayana path, and what we call the middle way or Madhyamika, it is to purify this dualistic habit and to realize non-substantial wisdom space. So the Mahayana path then is, as Rinpoche says, to purify any contradictory dualistic substance habit, which is the continual cause of samsara, and then proceed to realize non-substantial wisdom space. Basically, with the Mahayana, we dismantle any dogmatic attachment, any philosophical position, we dismantle any dualistic habit. And the result is the freedom that no longer is caught up in this narrowness. Like Sri Singha says, the sentient beings' minds abide like fragments. The minds of Buddhas are like space. And Vajrayana then is founded on this vision. The Vajrayana is the path of wisdom awareness, and as this then manifests, the ground is establishing this nature. We can do that through reason, or we can do this through faith, devotion, and so forth, and then by that we then sustain and continue this recognition. We receive empowerment from our teacher to stay with that recognition. The unobstructed quality of this wisdom is the continual spontaneous presence of the wisdom deity, the triple gem. So at that point, we actually make the abiding reality of enlightenment. We make that the path, and that's where we then refer to Vajrayana as the resultant vehicle. With such a view, all reality manifests as wisdom deity and pure realm. The primordial ground embraces all phenomena. So this is where we operate with wisdom, that which is beyond the scope of the ordinary mind. So this is what we generally are unveiling through the path. So like I said before, we talk about this continuous ordinary-minded delusion that creates samsara, and underneath, at its core, there is this abiding reality of clarity, of wisdom. And so as we progress through the path and have some confidence in the nature of vipassana and have some appreciation for a quality that abides within through possibly either through analysis or through the blessing of the teacher, through the extraordinary circumstance of the teacher pointing out our nature, then we understand both the subjective dimension and the objective dimension without delusion, without imputing confused projections. And that's where we then sustain this vision through the practice of wisdom, deity, and understanding pure realm. So that primordial ground that we are uncovering is something that permeates all phenomena, both subjective and objective. There's a quote from the Guhyagarbha Tantra, and note this name, the Guhyagarbha Tantra, because this is a very important scripture. It's not something that is easily accessed, but if ever there's a chance to study this, this is a very important work, and the foundation, particularly in the Nyingma tradition, of the entire tantric approach. But in there it says, unoriginating natural mind is the origin of all phenomena. So this mind that we're uncovering, it permeates all phenomena, all perceptions. And these perceptions are then seen as the manifestations of wisdom. So this concludes chapter 1, or rather the chapter 2, but the first that we're doing today. And essentially is then establishing, you could say, our reality. Now, chapter 3 then is a short chapter that aims at understanding how we approach this understanding. And we do so on the basis of what we in Buddhism call pramana. But we have to understand, you could say, conventional truth and absolute truth. So as far as conventional truth goes, right, we have the two persons again with the figure in front of them, one saying there's a 6, one saying there's a 9. They go to the Buddha and says, who's right? And the Buddha says, worldly beings argue with me, but I'm not going to argue with them. So realizing dependent origination is what provides freedom from rigid positions. When we say dependent origination, it means that there is something that appears, but it's not unconditional. It's something that depends on where we're standing, who we are, what our perceptions are. So when we understand this praticca samutpada, dependent origination, we become a bit wiser. We don't really say it's a 6 or a 9. We say it depends. And that is the foundation of what we call the non-abiding middle way. This quote, by the way, is from a sutra that's called Meeting of Parent and Child. And it essentially is intended then to point to the Madhyamika vision then of that relatively there's those who studied Madhyamika, they would remember that there's Tsongtse Rinpoche, when he was teaching it, used to refer to this the example of the shepherd. The shepherd is someone who just sees things without any philosophical interpretation, just straightforward. And from that point of view, yes, the Buddha agrees with everybody. The shepherd stands on one side and said, it's a 6. The Buddha says yes. Another shepherd stands on the other side and says it's a 9. The Buddha says yes. Now, the numerous teachings that we find in Buddhism, it reflects the numerous dispositions of the students. So with those, we have, of course, the Buddha's skill in understanding things as they are, or his wisdom in understanding things as they are, and his skill then in conveying this according to the capacities, the dispositions of the students. And again, coming back to the nihilism, which why we keep talking about it is, of course, because this is very much where most of us have come from. More or less implicitly, it's present in everywhere in our sciences. And as such, we should be aware how it only accepts then the tangible according to personal and also consensual belief. Like we talked about last time, we had things that we experience personally. I'm looking at a carpet, somebody else sees it in a different way, but we do have a consensus there that there's a carpet that's there. But the Dharma goes beyond these narrow constructions. Dharma talks about something that's beyond time and space. And in doing so, the Dharma is not doing this just as a belief system, but does so on the basis of pramana, or the science, what we then call valid knowledge. There are 3 kinds of valid cognition that we use. Rinpoche refers to them as evidence. And there's the direct valid cognition, which is where we see, for example, a fire. And that's an accurate perception by faultless senses. We have our eyes, we can hear it, and so forth. So that's just plain perception, direct valid cognition. Inferential cognition is inference through science. That's where we see smoke and we say, well, I can't see any fire, but I bet you there's a fire there. Then there's valid cognition of what is concealed, which is the scope of clairvoyance or omniscience. And that's where you could say there's an element of all 3 of these, they go back to the subject that sees or infers. But there's also the valid knowledge of what is concealed. And that's where you could say the Buddha or a sage has a scope of understanding that is based on going beyond ordinary consciousness. So there's things like clairvoyance or omniscience. Clairvoyance in the case of those on the path, omniscience in the case of the Buddha. Now, that's where we trust then the Buddha. And that you could say is blind faith, but it's blind faith that's pretty informed. For example, if I believe there was a moon landing, it's because I have this faith in the people at NASA. Not everybody shares such faith, but I reckon that it's probably valid. And so we do in Buddhism, we do have some sense of ascribing what we could call a greater epistemic capacity, a greater degree of seeing clearer in the case of certain things. So in the case of the perceptions of a yogi or a Buddha, there is some faith there. Of course, that doesn't qualify as far as ordinary science goes. But then again, most scientists, even though they haven't been to Rome, they probably have this belief in that there is Rome on the basis of what they've heard and so forth. So the knowledge that someone with great epistemic capacity, someone who has insight, then naturally overrides those who don't. And those who've studied the way of the Madhyamika Avatara, the Madhyamaka teaching, they might remember that Chandrakirti, one place he says, whoever has unclear vision cannot affect those with clear vision. Whoever deserts stainless wisdom mind cannot affect those with stainless wisdom mind. And we also have this quote from the Vimalakirtinidesa Sutra, where the Buddha also says that in terms of seeing clearly, seeing the world as pure, there's a discussion between a Brahmin, a god called Brahmasikin and Shariputra. And Brahmasikin sees the world as completely like heaven. And Shariputra says, no, it's a place of suffering. And going to the Buddha, the Buddha actually says, yes, Brahmasikin's, the god's view is closer to mine. There's less obscuration there. And he says, we can't be helped that sentient beings, they have distorted perception. So that's where here it says, whoever deserts stainless wisdom mind, that's such a sentient being, cannot really, their view doesn't supersede those who have stainless wisdom mind. So we say ignorance cannot disqualify valid knowledge. So there is some degree to which we then trust those with stainless wisdom mind. We talk about valid cognition in terms of two kinds. There's conditional evidence for ordinary beings, and that's basically the two first that we saw before, which is the direct and you could say inferential valid cognition. This is valid cognition for ordinary limited perception or confined perception. And then there's unconditional evidence for sublime being, valid cognition of pure vision. So in Tibetan, Tsutong and Daktsi Kitsema. But these two categories need to be understood for us to actually understand then the Vajrayana. And we say that this unconditional evidence is based on the unobscured vision of sublime beings. And this is where we then hear of the pure phenomena of enlightenment. For example, we see tankas that portray Sukhavati and so forth. Doesn't mean that this sort of slightly naive painting, that's how it actually looks. But it implies that there is a clarity of perception that is tangible. It's not just like there's a blank nothing. You know, the more you realize emptiness, the less there is of anything. Rather, it's the other way around. Phenomena become clearer. So with that greater understanding, this greater unobscured vision, then this is where we then also in the sutras hear, for example, how some places it says that in every dust mote there are countless pure realms. Or we say, for example, that Buddha nature pervades all beings. So we could say that this is beyond our scope. So the closest we come then is faith and inspiration that we could experience encountering sublime beings. And then through what they, you could say, teach, and not just teach, but very much enable to show within ourselves, there is then the quality of blessing that eliminates some confusion. And there is some appreciation for this purity that then can emerge. And this becomes the foundation of the Vajrayana. So as far as the path goes, we initially access this validity through this faith, this understanding about our reality, this vision that is presented by the Buddha. We initially access that by way of the conventional evidence of confined perception. And with that, we dismantle beliefs and habitual assumptions. And with that, we mean that we habitually believe that things, for example, last. We habitually believe that our neurotic, self-centered strategies will bring happiness. And we habitually believe that things are solid and ultimately existing. And that's, for example, where we look at the Tri Lakshana, or the three first seals, the three characteristics. Let's say compounded phenomena, they are impermanent. dualistic or neurotic mind is suffering and phenomena are empty. So that's why we dismantle our assumptions. And then practicing, we then begin to dismantle our confusion, and then we begin to have direct experience of pure phenomena. So the conditional evidence works in a confined perception of reality, but it does not unveil what is unconditional. So you would have some people who would say, oh, the Vajrayana, that's complete nonsense. That's just importing some sort of wishful thinking about all sorts of gods and so forth. So that's not at all the case. And we do understand that there are certain things that we don't understand. If that wasn't the case, that we would know as much as the Buddhas. As it says one place, if the perceptions of ordinary senses were ultimately true, what benefit could the path of sublime beings have for anyone? So these ordinary perceptions that we have through our senses, they only reflect passing conditional reality. And it's only because of this, and it's only because this is the scope of ordinary beings that the Buddha then begins to teach according to that. You could say the nature of reality is uncompounded, empty, and the nature of reality is bliss. But if the Buddha were to say that, it wouldn't make sense. So the Buddha taught, there's suffering. There's the cause of suffering and so forth. So in ultimate reality, there are no categories of Dharma. And we can appreciate that. That means that actually with Buddhism, we're not operating with some absolute dogma. And ultimately, the nature of the path takes us beyond the illness and to a place where there's no categories of the illness. And as such, we don't even think in terms of once we're well, we don't even think in terms of being well or ill. We're completely beyond such categories. We also say once we have crossed the ocean, we don't need the vessel anymore. So in relative reality, there are countless teachings for countless dispositions of beings. And these then have a role. These are very important. And these then are classified as the Dharma of revealed meaning and the Dharma of realization. Dharma of revealed meaning we sometimes call Dharma of transmission. This means the words of the Buddha. Dharma of realization is the realization of the Buddha. So both of these transmissions, they arise from the Buddha's form, Rupakaya. And because we have the Buddha teaching and the Buddha realized, we have, for example, great sage, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Khyentse Rinpoche. There's a form and there's someone teaching and so forth, and there's still manifest from that is you could say, the reflection of realization. But that manifestation that we have, the Rupakaya, that means the form body, that is inseparable from the body of reality, Dharmakaya. What makes the Rupakaya special is that this is a form that reflects ultimate reality. So we would say that as we travel the path, we need to do so on the basis of the Dharma of revealed meaning. And the objective is the Dharma of realization. So we say again, the Dharma of realization is accessed through the Dharma of revealed meaning. Rinpoche, he says, the Buddhas abide in measureless pure appearances. From their effortless, guiding wisdom, speech and spontaneous manifestation of infinite qualities, they can bring sentient beings to this state of pure appearances through many extensive traditions or through one simplest tradition of holy Dharma, which comes from the pure wisdom hearts of all the Buddhas. So that concludes the study of chapters 2 and 3, the source of phenomena and simple logic. Any questions? A hammer is useful. Does it matter if it has no inherent existence? Sorry, a hammer is useful. Does it matter if it has no inherent essence? Absolutely. No, there's no problem. We would say that's a hammer. That's where the Buddha doesn't argue. But at the same time, if someone were to say, oh, this is God. This hammer is. This is it. We've found level 42. We found the truth. Not sure about that. So that's why we distinguish between the two truths. There's the conventional existence of or appearance of the hammer, and there's also its ultimate lack of inherent essence. So that's also if you happen to lose the hammer, then the sage doesn't break down and cry. The sage says, oh, well, that's just the hammer. At the moment, I can try to use a non-dualistic mind, and being aware that my projections prevent me to have a pure perception because I haven't purified my dualistic view. So do I need to wait till I am introduced to the nature of mind to have pure perception? Not at all. Not at all. This is also where Rinpoche, he was saying that the Buddhas skillfully, they use tangible and intangible phenomena. The Buddhas use dualistic mind and non-dualistic mind. So right now, for example, we experience, I am thinking of this. And we use that dualistic mind to say, right now I'm perpetuating a particular habit, a particular thought, and coming back to the breath, I can experience liberation from that pattern. Likewise also, I might have clinging to myself and being kind to others and going out of myself, being active and being compassionate to the world around. I experience liberation from, you could say, the sort of inwardness that sometimes brings us down. So that creates some experience of lightness. And in both these cases, we're using dualistic phenomena. So everything that has to do with the path in terms of what we do is what we could call dualistic or tangible phenomena. And the non-dualistic view, the non-dualistic experience, that's what's beyond doing. That's beyond duality. That's intangible. I hope that makes sense. So, if there are no further questions, then say bye-bye. And next time we have quite a long chapter, so we're going to actually just read half of it. So read until page 48. So read all of that chapter, clearing deviations, and cleaning deviations, and read approximately half of it. I mean, read as much as you want, but next time I'll be going through up to and including page 47. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Thank you.